In a Basel boarding house last winter, I observed a young professor, brilliant mind, capable of genuine scholarship, who spent every evening recounting his father's failures to anyone who would listen. My father never believed in me, he explained at dinner. He crushed my confidence, he announced at cards. I struggled with authority because of him. He confided over morning coffee. At 40 years old, he was still the boy seeking approval from a ghost. His scholarship suffered not from lack of ability, but from this necromancy. He could not write a word without consulting the phantom, without wondering, would father approve, would father disapprove? Meanwhile, his authentic work, the books only he could write, remained unborn, sacrificed on the altar of this endless conversation with a dead man. I see this pattern repeated in 1,000 variations across Europe. The merchant's daughter who blames her mother's coldness for her failed marriages. The artist who traces his mediocrity to childhood criticism. Each has constructed an elaborate genealogy of inadequacy, a careful lineage of victimhood that absolves them of responsibility for what they have become. They think they are healing. They are, in fact, feeding ghosts, and the ghosts are growing stronger. What I offer in these pages is not healing, but exorcism, the violent, necessary destruction of the phantoms you have been worshiping. What if I were to tell you that the wounded child you seek to heal does not exist, that every tear you shed for this phantom, every therapeutic session spent excavating your earliest hurts, every journal entry tracing your present weakness to childhood cause, all of this is not healing but necromancy, not liberation but the conjuring of ghosts? I have observed this pattern in every boarding house and salon across Europe. The educated classes have made a profession of their suffering. They meet in parlors, not to create but to compare wounds, not to build futures but to excavate pasts. Each evening the same recitations. My father never believed in me. My mother withheld affection. I was raised in a house of emotional coldness, and with each telling, the ghost grows stronger. You see, the wounded inner child is not a victim waiting to be rescued. It is a phantom you have conjured through your backward-gazing attention. Every time you explain your present inadequacy through childhood injury, you feed this ghost. Every time you trace your timidity to your overbearing father, your inability to love to your cold mother, your professional paralysis to early criticism, you give substance to something that should have dissolved years ago. Consider the young professor I knew in Basel. Brilliant mind, capable of genuine scholarship. Yet every evening in our boarding house, he held court with elaborate explanations of how his father's severity prevented his greatness. At 40 years old, he was still conducting dialogues with a dead man. His scholarship suffered not from lack of ability, but from this ghostly consultation. He could not write a word without wondering, would father approve, would father disapprove? Meanwhile, his authentic work, the scholarship only he could produce, remained unborn, sacrificed on the altar of this phantom conversation. This is what you must understand. The child you seek to heal does not exist in reality. It exists only in the narrative you have constructed to explain your current inadequacies. And by feeding this narrative, you starve your future self. Watch yourself when you speak of your childhood wounds. Listen to your own voice. Notice the shift in your posture, the change in your tone. Do you hear it? That subtle satisfaction? You have made your suffering into your identity. Your wounds have become your most cherished possession. This is the first truth you must confront. You are not the victim of your childhood. You are the priest of a religion of suffering, and you conduct its rituals daily. Understanding why you are wounded has become a substitute for becoming unwounded. This is the great deception of our age. You have mistaken explanation for transformation, insight for strength, comprehension for change. I know a merchant's son in Leipzig who has spent 3 years in therapy, as they are beginning to say, processing his father's emotional unavailability. He can now explain with intricate sophistication why he struggles with intimacy, fears success, remains paralyzed in his career decisions. His explanatory power has grown immensely. His actual life, not changed at all, not one bit. Explanation has become his life's work, replacing the work of actually living. Each week he arrives at his physician's office with new insights. Ah, he announces with satisfaction, I now understand that my father's preoccupation with commerce made me feel invisible. The physician nods approvingly. Another layer uncovered, another insight achieved, another payment rendered. But his intimacy problems persist. His career remains stagnant, his life stays small. Why? Because understanding is not transformation. It is, in fact, transformation's most sophisticated enemy. Calculate for yourself. How much time do you spend explaining your limitations versus acting despite them? Most people spend 90% of their energy explaining, 10% acting, then wonder why nothing changes. They have become addicted to the hit of insight, to the moment of, aha, now I understand. This satisfaction itself becomes the goal, replacing actual change. The therapeutic culture needs you to remain wounded. Consider the structure. Therapy never quite ends. There is always another layer to process, another wound to discover, another childhood memory requiring interpretation. The wounded child is infinitely excavatable because you are creating it with each excavation. This provides moral permission for your present inadequacy. I cannot because my parents becomes an unassailable defense. Who can argue with childhood damage? Who dares suggest you might be responsible for transcending it? You sit in a comfortable prison of understanding, bars made of sophisticated psychological knowledge, door locked with the key of self-compassion. But here is what you have not understood. Understanding your damage provides comfort, yes. But comfort is not freedom. Explanation is not change. You can understand everything about why you are limited and remain limited. Or you can understand nothing and become unlimited. This week, when facing a difficult situation where old patterns arise, resist the urge to explain. Ask instead, what would someone without this explanation do? Then do that thing badly, clumsily, imperfectly. The doing matters more than the execution. Each action taken without therapeutic authorization weakens explanation's tyranny. You cannot serve both understanding and becoming. One must be sacrificed. Which do you value more, the comfort of your sophisticated self-knowledge or the danger of your transformation? Where did this obsession with childhood wounds originate? Why does our age treat every parental imperfection as a trauma requiring professional intervention? To answer this, we must become genealogists, tracing the bloodline of our moral values. In Nice, I observed two Catholic priests who, having lost their faith in God, became physicians of the soul, what we now call alienists or nerve doctors. They had merely exchanged confession for therapy, absolution for validation, sin for trauma. The structure remained identical. Weekly sessions, perpetual need for professional intervention, moral authority claimed through other suffering. Only the vocabulary had changed. This is not coincidence. Therapeutic culture is Christian slave morality in modern dress. Let me explain what I mean by this genealogy. All morality has a history, a genealogy. What we call good and evil are not eternal truths, but historical inventions arising from particular conditions, serving particular interests. There are two fundamental types of morality, master morality and slave morality. Master morality celebrates strength, self-overcoming, joy in power's expression. It says, good is what makes me strong, bad is what makes me weak. This is the morality of those who can express their will to power directly, who need no justification for their existence beyond their capacity to create and become. Slave morality inverts this entirely. It emerges from those who cannot express power directly, the weak, the sick, the defeated. Unable to overcome their oppressors through strength, they invent a moral order where their weakness becomes virtue, humility becomes good, suffering becomes noble, strength becomes suspect, even evil. The meek shall inherit the earth. This is slave morality's promise. eventual revenge disguised as moral superiority. Now, observe therapeutic culture through this lens. By insisting that everyone is wounded, that everyone deserves compassion for their suffering, that everyone needs healing, this culture creates a moral order where weakness is virtue and strength is suspect. The one who says, "I overcame my childhood without needing to understand or heal it," becomes an offense, a reproach to all those still nursing at the breast of their therapeutic explanations. Your therapeutic friends will accuse you of not doing the emotional work or avoiding your feelings. Recognize this as a moral weapon designed to make you feel guilty for your strength. They are attempting to make you submit to slave morality, to accept that weakness properly processed and understood is virtue. The liberation comes through seeing this genealogy. Once you understand how these values were constructed to serve specific interests that do not align with your becoming, you are free to ask, do these values serve my strength or my weakness, my becoming or my stagnation? Christian, original sin has become childhood trauma. The priest has become the therapist. Salvation has become healing. Eternal unworthiness has become perpetual woundedness requiring endless treatment. But the structure, the moral technology of creating guilt, maintaining dependency, preventing power remains identical. You are not obligated to heal. You are not morally required to process your trauma. You are not ethically bound to understand your feelings. These are values invented by those who benefit from your weakness. You are free to choose different values, values that make you strong rather than sympathetic, that make you dangerous rather than safe. You must take absolute responsibility for what you have become while relinquishing all blame for what was done to you. This is the most difficult and most liberating stance possible. Listen carefully to this distinction, for most will misunderstand it entirely. You are not responsible for your childhood. You are responsible for what you do with your childhood. You are not to blame for the cruelty inflicted upon you, the love withheld from you, the damage done to your young self. That is fixed, unchangeable, a fact of history as immutable as the date of your birth. But you are absolutely responsible for what you make of this damage. The past provides the condition, you provide the response. And it is in the response that your humanity is forged or squandered. I know a physician in Genoa who was beaten savagely as a child by a drunken father. He could have spent his life explaining his struggles through this violence. Many would have sympathized. All would have understood. Instead, at 25, he made a declaration. That was done to me, gesturing to his scarred back. But this gesturing to his life, his practice, his relationships, this is what I do with what was done. Within 2 years, his medical practice flourished. He married. He published papers on the treatment of nervous conditions. Nothing in his childhood changed. It remained as brutal as ever in the historical record. But everything in his relationship to his childhood changed. He had moved from blame to responsibility, from explanation to creation, from victim to agent. This distinction terrifies because it removes your most comfortable excuse. When you release blame, you also release the justification it provided. I cannot because my parents dies. Now what? This freedom is dangerous. It demands you become capable without permission to remain incapable. Every moment you spend as victim of your history is a moment stolen from being creator of your destiny. These are mutually exclusive positions. You cannot simultaneously be both. The backward-gazing stance and the forward-creating stance occupy the same space. One must be sacrificed. Most will refuse this responsibility. It is too heavy, too demanding. They prefer the comfortable role of explained inadequacy. My father was cruel, therefore I am timid. My mother was cold, therefore I cannot love. These causal chains feel like truth. They are, in fact, choices. Choices to remain determined by the past, rather than determined by will. When you catch yourself saying or thinking, I am this way because of what happened to me, immediately rephrase, I am this way because I have not yet chosen to become otherwise. Feel the shift in this rephrasing? Power transfers from past to present, from them to you. Each morning, practice this declaration before your mirror. I am responsible for what I become today. Not my parents, not my past, not my circumstances. I alone am responsible. Feel the weight of this. Feel the freedom of this. Let it terrify and exhilarate you simultaneously. This is the first freedom, the terrible, magnificent freedom of taking responsibility without blame. Do not mistake this for blaming yourself for what was done to you. That would be merely inverted victimhood, another way of remaining trapped in the past. You are not responsible for the abuse, the neglect, the damage inflicted. You are responsible for not allowing that damage to define your becoming. This distinction is everything. The same iron becomes either plow or sword, depending on what it is made into. Your childhood experiences are neither intrinsically damaging nor helpful. They are raw material awaiting transmutation. This is the alchemical principle you must grasp. After my father died when I was 4 years old, I could have constructed an elaborate mythology of damage. For years, I confess this honestly, I did precisely that, though not consciously. I felt his absence like a phantom limb. I sought replacement fathers everywhere, in Schopenhauer's writings, in Wagner's genius, in the father gods of Greek tragedy. But in my 35th year, during that fateful August at Sils Maria, recognition struck with the force of lightning. His absence created the very space where I had no choice but to create myself, without a model, without approval, without guidance. Had he lived, I would have remained obedient, conventional, a good Lutheran professor producing acceptable scholarship, never daring the heights of thought I have reached. His absence was not wound, but condition, not obstacle, but foundation. It made my philosophy possible. This is what you must understand. What you experienced as damage was often the crucible necessary for developing your particular capacities. The child who learned to read a tyrannical parent's moods develops psychological acuity that, properly redirected, becomes wisdom about human nature. The child who faced emotional indifference develops self-reliance that, properly channeled, becomes genuine independence. The child who knew cruelty developed knowledge of human nature's depths that, properly utilized, becomes philosophical insight. These capacities can be weaponized into strengths or can remain mere scars, mere symptoms. The difference lies not in the experience itself, but in the will applied to its transformation. You are the alchemist. Your childhood is the base metal. Gold or dross, you decide, through what you make of it. Consider two men in a Basel boarding house, both sons of tyrannical fathers, both bearing the psychological imprint of paternal severity. The first, call him Mueller, spends every social gathering explaining his present timidity through elaborate childhood excavation. My father crushed my confidence, he says, with the satisfaction of someone who has solved a puzzle. At 40, he remains the boy seeking approval. The second calling, Schneider, has transmuted his father's severity into his own exacting standards, his own relentless drive to excel. When his father's critical voice rises within him, he recognizes it not as truth, but as stimulus. The inner criticism becomes the goad that drives him to surpass himself. He carries his father not as wound, but as fuel. What is the difference between these two men? Mueller seeks to understand and heal. Schneider seeks to transmute and use. Mueller looks backward with therapeutic tools. Schneider looks forward with alchemical will. Mueller explains, Schneider becomes. For each childhood difficulty you have typically framed as damage. Ask not, how was I wounded, but what capacity did this force me to develop? This question shifts you from victim to alchemist, from damaged to forged. Hypervigilance becomes acute perception. Emotional suppression becomes self-mastery. Parental inconsistency becomes adaptability. Name these force-developed capacities, then weaponize them. Use them ruthlessly for your becoming rather than citing them as evidence of your wounding. The iron was always iron. Whether it becomes plow or sword depends entirely on the smith's will and the fire's heat. You are both smith and iron. The forge is your daily choice to transmute rather than to mourn. Before you can create a new self, you must destroy the old self's most cherished narratives. Not reform them, not heal them, destroy them. This requires violence, not physical violence, but the violence of betrayal, the cruelty of self-overcoming, the ruthlessness of becoming. Most people cannot do this because they have become their wounds. To destroy the wound narrative feels like self-murder, but this is precisely what's required. You must murder the wounded child you have been protecting. You must betray your own pity for yourself. You must commit what feels like treachery against your therapeutic truths. I knew a young woman in Basel, daughter of an emotionally absent mother, who spent years in elaborate therapeutic processing of this absence. She could recite with precision every instance of maternal coldness, every moment of withheld affection, every developmental wound. Her therapist praised her insight. Her friend sympathized. She was the picture of someone doing the work. One evening at a salon gathering, she simply stopped. Mid-sentence in her familiar recitation, she stopped. The silence was profound. Then she said only, "I am done being the daughter of a cold mother. I am now someone else entirely." Her friends were disturbed. They accused her of denial, of suppression, of avoiding the necessary work of healing. She was unmoved. Within a year, she had transformed entirely, not because she healed the wound, but because she killed the identity built around it. This is what I mean by necessary violence. You have fused your identity with your wounds. I am someone who struggles with intimacy because of my mother. Is not a temporary condition you're working through. It has become who you are. Destroying the wound requires destroying this identity and tolerating the terrifying void that follows. The caterpillar cannot become butterfly through gentle transition. It must dissolve entirely in the chrysalis, must become liquid, must lose all structure before the new form emerges. You resist this dissolution because it feels like death. It is death of the old self. But without this death, no rebirth is possible. You must perform what I call the revaluation of all your personal values. Everything you believed was your deepest truth must be examined for whether it serves your becoming or your stagnation. Most of your therapeutic truths keep you weak. They must be destroyed without ceremony, without gradual transition, without the therapeutic gentleness that would only preserve them in weakened form. This week, identify your core wound narrative, the story you tell about yourself that explains your limitations. Write it down fully, every detail, every connection between past and present. Then burn it. Literally burn the paper. As it burns, speak aloud. I am no longer this story. I am becoming otherwise. The symbolic act matters. It marks the death of an identity. Your therapeutic self will scream that this is denial, that you're avoiding the real work, that you're suppressing trauma. Ignore this voice. It is the old self, fighting for its survival. For the following week, refuse to speak this narrative, even when directly asked about your history. When people press, say only, "That was then. I am now becoming otherwise." Most cannot endure the weak. They flee back to the comfortable warmth of their wound identity, where at least they know who they are, where at least their suffering has meaning. But if you can endure the void, if you can tolerate not knowing who you are while becoming who you might be, then the violence will have done its necessary work. After this destruction, there is no returning to therapeutic comfort. You have committed the unforgivable sin. You have abandoned your wound narrative without proper healing, without closure, without the blessing of your therapeutic authorities. You have simply declared yourself otherwise. This is the violence required. Anything gentler merely rearranges your prison cell while leaving you imprisoned. How you begin each day reveals and determines your orientation toward existence. This is not a trivial matter of morning routines. This is the hinge upon which your entire life turns. The therapeutic person wakes and asks implicitly or explicitly, "How do I feel? What are my wounds telling me today? What emotional weather am I experiencing? What do I need to process or heal? Before rising from bed, before feet touch floor, the interrogation begins. By the time they sit for breakfast, they are already exhausted from this archaeological dig through their feelings. The self-overcoming person wakes and asks, what am I capable of creating today? What will I forge? What challenge will I use to strengthen myself? The attention moves immediately outward and forward, toward action rather than toward feeling, toward creation rather than toward excavation. This difference in morning questions compounds over time into entirely different lives. One person spends decades interrogating feelings. The other person spends decades creating reality. Same number of hours, same human capacities, different question, different destiny. I observed this clearly one summer at a pension in Sils Maria. Two guests, both educated men of similar age and circumstance. One spent his mornings journaling his feelings, monitoring his emotional state, processing his childhood memories. By noon, he was depleted, capable of little beyond reading and light conversation. The other rose at dawn, asked himself what he could accomplish that day, and immediately walked the mountain trails, planning his work. By noon, he was energized, creating, engaged with his projects. Same pension, same meals, same mountain air. Different morning question, different life. You see, attention is limited. Energy is finite. The energy spent on feeling interrogation is energy unavailable for world engagement. The morning sets this direction toward self-absorption or toward creation. One day's questioning creates small difference. 10,000 days of the same. Question creates entirely different destinies. The questions you ask determine what you notice. What you notice determines what you experience. What you experience reinforces your questions. This loop, repeated daily over years, creates your life's trajectory. Breaking this loop requires changing the fundamental question. Tomorrow morning, before any feeling checking, before any emotional inventory, ask aloud, what am I capable of creating today? Write 3 concrete answers. Then begin creating immediately, no processing, no preparing, no warming up your creative apparatus. Just begin. Notice how this question produces a different day than how do I feel produces. The feeling question turns you inward toward an infinitely explorable subjective landscape. The creation question turns you outward toward finite, completable actions. Feelings are endless. Creations are actual. Continue this for 7 days before evaluating. Most will discover that the day's entire quality changed not because circumstances changed, but because the orienting question changed their relationship to circumstances. You discovered that your emotional weather need not determine your day's productivity. You discovered that mood is not destiny. This is not about suppressing feelings. It is about deprioritizing them. Feelings don't disappear when you stop interrogating them. They simply stop dominating your existence. They become weather rather than climate, passing clouds rather than permanent conditions. The morning question establishes your fundamental stance. Will you live as subject of your feelings or as agent of your will? Most live as subjects, helplessly buffeted by their emotional weather. If you learn to live as agents, choosing their actions regardless of their feelings, the difference begins with a single question, asked daily, upon waking. When you catch yourself beginning to explain your present limitations by your past damage, stop. Simply stop. Mid-sentence, mid-thought. This stopping is the most powerful intervention possible, yet most people never learn it. A Leipzig professor habitually blamed his father's severity for his timidity in professional confrontations. At a university salon gathering, he began his familiar recitation, I struggle with confrontation because my father always, and stopped, just stopped. The silence was profound. The assembled company waited for the familiar conclusion. It never came. He said only, that was then. I am becoming otherwise now. The discomfort was palpable. His colleagues had lost their familiar entertainment. He had lost his familiar excuse. But something shifted in that, stopping that years of therapeutic explanation had never produced. He had discovered he could interrupt himself, could choose what to express rather than helplessly expressing what arose. This stopping is not suppression. Suppression is pushing down what wants to emerge, creating pressure that will eventually explode. Stopping is different. It is the exercise of will, the assertion of choice, the demonstration that you are not compelled to complete every narrative that begins in your mind. Every stopped narrative is a repetition in the gymnasium of will. You are strengthening the muscle that can choose. The first time you stop yourself, it feels almost impossible. The urge to complete the familiar explanation is overwhelming. But like any muscle, it strengthens with use. After 10 stoppings, it becomes easier. After 100, it becomes natural. After 1,000, the old narratives lose their compulsive quality entirely. The discomfort you feel when stopping reveals how much you've invested in the narrative. Greater discomfort indicates deeper identity fusion with the wound story. This is information, not judgment. Use it to measure how enslaved you've been to your explanations. Watch what happens socially when you stop. Others become disturbed. Why? Because they've been cast in your drama. Your wound narrative gives them roles to play. Sympathizer, fellow sufferer, advice giver, witness. When you refuse to perform the familiar script, you disorient them. They may become uncomfortable, even hostile. This discomfort is theirs to manage, not yours to alleviate by resuming your performance. Set a daily target. Interrupt your wound narrative 3 times. Can be in conversation or in thought, both count. When you notice yourself beginning the familiar explanation, stop. Replace with silence or with "that was then," nothing more. Track these stoppings for 2 weeks. Mark them in a notebook with simple tally marks. Don't analyze, just count. After 14 days, count the total. 21 stoppings minimum begins rewiring. 42 creates genuine pattern disruption. The accumulation matters more than individual intensity. You are training your will through repeated small acts, not through single dramatic gestures. Do not replace the wound narrative with a new story about how you're no longer telling wound narratives. This is the ghost in new clothing. The stopping should lead to silence or to forward-focused speech, "I am becoming," not to new, backward-looking narratives about your healing journey. Between impulse and expression lies choice. This is what you discover through stopping. You are not compelled to complete every narrative that begins in your mind. This discovery that you can stop yourself is more powerful than any insight about why you tell these stories. You have moved from understanding to agency, from explanation to will, from helpless expression to conscious choice. The stop is the hinge. Everything else follows from this small, repeated act of interruption. Your body does not distinguish between physical and psychological challenge. Every physical overcoming teaches the lesson of transformation through discomfort. This is not metaphor, it is the most direct path to psychological strength. During my decade of wandering through Switzerland and Italy, chronic migraines and digestive agonies plagued me. Some days the pain was so severe I could barely see. I could have spent these years in bed, processing the unfairness of illness, seeking therapeutic understanding of my body's betrayal. Many in my position did exactly this. Instead, I walked 6 hours daily, 8 when I could manage it, sometimes 10, through alpine terrain, up mountain paths, in weather both fair and foul. Each step was an act of overcoming. The body learned what the mind resisted, that capacity grows through use despite discomfort, that what seems impossible at minute 1 becomes possible at minute 60. This physical discipline produced my philosophy more than any intellectual work. The body taught the mind how to become. This is what you must understand. Physical and psychological overcoming use the same neural pathways. Strengthen one, strengthen both. Consider the lesson of cold water immersion. The first 30 seconds are maximally uncomfortable. Your body screams protest. Your mind declares, "I cannot endure this." By minute 2, it becomes tolerable. By minute 3, occasionally pleasant. The body has adapted. But more importantly, you have discovered that your mind's declarations of incapacity are false. You endured what you were certain you could not endure. This lesson that the mind lies about capacity transfers to every domain. The man who forces himself into cold water daily learns to distrust his mind's protestations of impossibility. When his mind says, "I cannot overcome this psychological pattern," he remembers the cold water. If he could endure that voluntary discomfort, he can endure the discomfort of changing his behaviors, his thoughts, his character. The physical proof cannot be argued away by sophisticated psychological reasoning. Long walks in challenging terrain serve a different purpose. 6 hours of mountain walking with no entertainment, no distraction, forces you to encounter yourself without the protective buffer of comfort. The body demands breath, exertion, navigation. Quiet the therapeutic mind's endless chatter. Truth emerges when the clever mind is exhausted from physical effort. I wrote some of my most profound insights after 8 hours of mountain walking, when my body was tired and my intellectual defenses were down. In this exhaustion state, the sophisticated rationalizations fall away. You cannot maintain your clever explanations when your body is demanding rest, water, food. What remains is closer to truth than anything produced in comfortable contemplation. This week, commit to daily physical discomfort. Cold shower, long walk in challenging weather, exercise beyond your comfort zone. Do not frame this as self-punishment. Frame it as will training. As you do each practice, note the moment when your mind says, "I cannot endure this." Then observe how you do endure it. Apply this lesson immediately to your psychological patterns. If I can endure this cold water, I can endure the discomfort of changing my habits. The physical practice trains will. The mental association transfers the training to psychological domains. Your body becomes teacher. Your mind becomes student. This is the proper hierarchy, not the inverted modern arrangement where sophisticated minds explain away the body's simple wisdom. Do not become an ascetic who mistakes suffering for virtue. The point is not to suffer, but to discover capacity through physical challenge. Any physical overcoming teaches the lesson. Choose practices appropriate to your health and capacity. The principle matters more than the specific practice. Each evening before sleep, perform this accounting. Did I today act from strength or from weakness? From future or from past? From creation or from explanation? Mark each significant action in these columns. This practice creates self-knowledge without self-pity, evaluation without excuse. I know a merchant in Turin who kept such an action, friend, and free accounting for 6 months. Initially, his weakness column dwarfed his strength column. Evidence of how often he chose explanation over action, how frequently he retreated to comfortable patterns rather than risking new behaviors. The ratio was shameful. Perhaps 20 entries in weakness, 3 in strength on an average day. But the mere visibility of this ratio shamed him into changing, not because he judged himself morally, judgment is useless, but because he could no longer lie to himself about his choices. The evidence was written before him nightly. By month 6, the columns had reversed. He had not gained new insights or healed old wounds. He had simply made his choices visible, and visibility demanded better choices. This is the power of measurement. What remains unconscious remains unchangeable. The evening accounting makes your daily choices visible, removing the comfortable fog of self-deception. You cannot pretend about who you are when the evidence accumulates, nightly in your own handwriting. Do not judge individual choices as good or bad. Track ratios instead. Are you choosing strength more this week than last? Is the percentage shifting? This removes moral judgment, which invites excuse-making, and replaces it with neutral measurement. You are not bad for choosing weakness. You are simply observing the ratio and watching it change. Daily choices seem random, but weekly patterns reveal truth. After 2 weeks of accounting, you will notice patterns invisible in the moment. I always explain when around my mother. I choose strength when alone, but weakness in social situations. I am strong in my work, but weak in intimate relationships. These patterns, once visible, lose their invisibility-granted power. The warrior evaluating combat performance notes what worked and what didn't without self-recrimination or self-congratulation. This is the stance you must adopt, ruthless but not harsh, factual evaluation, not emotional judgment. Today, I chose explanation when confronted by my employer. This is weakness. Tomorrow, I will choose differently. Note it, count it, move forward. Tonight, before sleep, review your day's significant choices. Create 2 columns. Acted from strength, future, creation, and acted from weakness, past, explanation. Be specific. Interrupted wound narrative in conversation with colleague goes in the strength column. Explain my timidity through childhood at dinner party goes in the weakness column. Write minimum 3 entries per column. Do this nightly for 2 weeks without exception. Consistency matters more than depth. No day off. No, I'm too tired tonight. The discipline of nightly accounting is itself a strength-building act. At 2 weeks, review all entries. Calculate. What percentage of track choices came from strength? This number is your honest self-assessment, not what you wish to be, but what you currently are. Do not turn this into self-flagellation when the weakness column dominates. That would be merely inverted pride, another form of therapeutic self-absorption. The accounting is information, not judgment. Also, avoid the trap of explaining why you made weak choices. Simply note them, count them, and let the accumulating evidence motivate change without elaborate self-analysis. After 2 weeks, you will see yourself clearly. You will know exactly how often you choose strength versus weakness because you have counted it. This knowledge is uncomfortable but necessary. You can only improve what you measure. Vague aspirations without measurement change nothing. Specific ratios tracked over time change everything. The evening accounting transforms your relationship with your days. You begin making choices in anticipation of the evening's reckoning. Will I be able to write this in the strength column? Becomes a question that guides action in the moment. The practice creates self-honesty, and self-honesty is the foundation upon which all transformation is built. Your transformation will disturb others. This is not a possibility, it is a certainty, and it is not your problem to solve. Let me explain why this disturbance is inevitable and why you must accept it as the price of becoming. A young woman in Nice transformed rapidly after abandoning her wound narrative about maternal coldness. She had spent years in a close circle of friends who bonded over their shared childhood traumas. They met weekly to process their wounds, to validate each other's suffering, to commiserate over their parents' failures. This was the foundation of their friendship. Within 3 months of her transformation, her invitations to these gatherings ceased. Why? She had committed the unforgivable sin. She got better. Her improvement made their continued suffering optional rather than inevitable. She had demonstrated that transformation without lengthy healing was possible. This revelation they could not forgive. You see, many relationships are built on shared suffering. We both understand because we both suffer is their implicit contract. When you stop suffering, you have violated this contract. The relationship was not actually about love or growth, it was about mutual wound validation. You provided them with a mirror that reflected their suffering back as justified, as understandable, as requiring endless processing. When you remove this mirror, they feel abandoned. Your transformation without their permission is an unspoken accusation. You chose to remain weak. They didn't experience it as choice. Your transformation makes it visible as choice, and they resent this revelation intensely. They preferred believing that healing is a long, complicated process requiring professional guidance. You demonstrated it could happen through simple refusal to continue the wound narrative. This disturbs the entire therapeutic framework they have invested in. Observe the 3 categories of response. Some will admire your transformation, and ask genuinely how you accomplished it. These people have been waiting for permission to attempt their own transformation. Your example gives them that permission. Invest in these relationships. Some will be confused and will distance themselves quietly. They don't know what to make of your change. The old relationship no longer works, and they lack capacity for a new one. These relationships will fade naturally. Let them go without drama. Some will actively attempt to pull you back to your former state. They will express concern. Are you okay? You seem different. Are you sure you're not just suppressing your pain? They will suggest you're in denial, that you're avoiding necessary work, that you regret this superficial change. These are the most dangerous because they will try to re-inject you with doubt about your transformation. Reduce their access to your inner world immediately, not cruelly, but firmly. Notice who asks, "Are you okay?" when you seem too strong, too unburdened, too free from your former suffering. This question reveals their discomfort with your strength. Respond with clarity. I am choosing to become otherwise. If they press for explanation, refuse to provide it. Your transformation need not be defended or explained. Simply live it. Perform this audit. List your significant relationships. For each, note honestly, does this person celebrate my strength or need my weakness? Then decide which relationships merit your continued emotional investment. This is not about cruelty, it is about conscious choice of where to invest your limited relational energy. You will lose relationships on this path, but you will lose the wrong relationships. Those who loved your wounds more than they loved you will depart. Those who needed you weak will find other weak people to bond with. The space they leave will be filled by people who meet you at your new level, who admire strength rather than bonding through shared weakness. The solitude that follows may be profound, but this solitude is necessary for continued transformation. Only in solitude can you solidify your new self without the constant negotiation of others' needs for your familiar weakness. Paradoxically, this solitude later enables deeper connection than therapeutic relationships ever could. The person who needs nothing from others can give everything. The person who seeks nothing for themselves can see others clearly. Do not become cruel or superior toward those still trapped in therapeutic culture. Your contempt would demonstrate that you're still defined in opposition to them, still reactive rather than genuinely transformed. Simply be what you have become, and let them respond as they will. The highest achievement is not accepting your fate, but loving it. This is what I call amor fati, love of fate. This means looking at your entire life, including every childhood suffering, every parental failure, every cruel circumstance, and saying not, "I understand why this happened," or "I have healed from this," but rather, "I would not change a single element because it produced me. And what I am becoming is worth every suffering that created this possibility." In August of 1881, by the pyramidal rock near Lake Silvaplana, 6,000 feet above the sea, the doctrine of eternal recurrence seized me with such force that I wept. Not therapeutic tears of release, but tears of recognition. This is what I have been seeking. This is the ultimate test. Could I will my entire life's return exactly as I lived it? The chronic illness that forced me into solitude, the poverty that prevented comfortable academic career, the misunderstanding that denied me recognition, the loneliness that made writing my only companion, could I affirm it all, knowing it would repeat infinitely? In that moment I could, not because the suffering was good in itself, but because it produced the possibility of this moment, this insight, this philosophy. A healthy Nietzsche would have dispersed his energies in society, in conventional professorship, in comfortable relationships. The sick Nietzsche, this Nietzsche, had to become a philosopher precisely because he could be nothing else. The suffering was the condition of the becoming. This is amor fati. Not resignation to fate, but fierce affirmation of it. Not passive acceptance, but active embrace. Not saying I suppose it had to be this way, but rather I would choose it this way infinitely. The difference is everything. Your past cannot change. It is fixed, immutable. But whether it was worth it depends entirely on what you make of it. Mediocrity makes all suffering meaningless waste. Greatness makes all suffering necessary preparation. You decide the worth retrospectively through what you become. If you live powerfully now, every past difficulty becomes necessary preparation. If you live weakly now, every past difficulty becomes meaningless trauma. Each present moment either validates or invalidates all past suffering. This is the awesome responsibility of the present. You are constantly determining whether your entire past was worth it. The eternal recurrence is both thought experiment and practical test. Imagine on your deathbed you are offered a choice. Live your life again exactly as you lived it, infinite times eternally, or dissolve into nothing. Which do you choose? If you choose dissolution, your life fails its own standard by the most honest measure. If you choose recurrence, if you can say, yes, again, exactly as it was, I want every moment returned to me, then you have succeeded in life's fundamental task. This is not achieved through declaration alone. You cannot pretend to amor fati before you have done the work of transmutation. But it is the North Star, the direction toward which all transformation points. Each choice you make either moves you toward this ultimate affirmation or away from it. This week, practice this thought experiment daily. Could I will my entire life's eternal? Return exactly as lived? When you encounter something you would want to change, ask, am I becoming someone who makes even this suffering worth it? Use this question as your compass for all choices. Write your life's major difficulties, childhood wounds, adult failures, physical illnesses, betrayals, losses. Below this list, write, I would not change a single element because it produced me, and I am becoming someone worthy of all this suffering. Read this aloud daily for 1 week. Notice the gap between the words and your actual feeling. This gap shows the work remaining. Amor fati is not Stockholm Syndrome. You are not saying suffering was good or justifying abuse. You are saying you will become great enough to make it worth it retrospectively. You are saying your becoming will be so magnificent that every difficulty was necessary preparation, every wound was the tempering fire that made your blade strong. This final transformation unifies you with your fate rather than dividing you against it. You are no longer at war with your history. You are no longer trying to heal from your past or escape into your future. You stand in the eternal present, creating yourself moment by moment, affirming your entire existence with such intensity that you could will its eternal recurrence. This is the summit of transformation, not healing but affirmation, not understanding but love, not acceptance but ecstatic embrace of everything that was necessary to produce what you are becoming. The Übermensch is not a fantasy of superhuman power. This is the first misunderstanding to destroy. It is not about being better than others, not about superiority or dominance. It is about self-overcoming as your fundamental nature, about becoming rather than being, about creation rather than explanation. I have met perhaps 3 individuals in my travels who approached this state. One was an elderly scholar in Leipzig who, when asked about his difficult childhood, seemed genuinely confused by the question's premise. My childhood? He mused. I suppose I had one. I have never considered what it owed or denied me, only what I have become, regardless. This absence of backward gazing was not suppression or denial. It was genuine transcendence. He was so fully his present self that his past existed only as distant historical fact, not as explanation, not as excuse, not as wound requiring attention. He had become someone for whom the question, how did your childhood damage you, was literally incomprehensible, because damage was not a category through which he understood his development. The Übermensch is not a destination you arrive at, it is a direction you orient toward. You will never achieve perfect self-overcoming, but each choice either moves you toward this possibility or away from it. This is the question that must guide you. Does this choice serve my becoming or my stagnation? Does it move me toward self-overcoming or toward comfortable weakness. Initially, self-overcoming is practice, discipline, effort. You must consciously choose it against the easier path of explanation and victimhood. But if you persist, something shifts. Self-overcoming becomes nature rather than practice. You reach a point where you cannot imagine living through explanation, cannot conceive of remaining in comfortable weakness. The effort becomes effortless. The practice becomes identity. This is when you approach the Übermensch, when overcoming is no longer what you do, but what you are. When the question, should I choose strength or weakness, no longer arises because weakness has become literally unthinkable. When creating meaning through your existence is as natural as breathing. The Übermensch creates their own values rather than adopting external moral frameworks. Not arbitrarily, this is not nihilism, but through their becoming, through what makes them strong versus what makes them weak. They ask not, is this morally right, but does this serve my becoming? This is beyond the morality of slave and master, victim and victor. These categories become irrelevant. When facing decisions, ask, what would someone moving toward the Übermensch choose? Not what feels right or what should I do, but what choice moves me toward self-overcoming? This question cuts through complexity, revealing which choice serves your becoming versus which serves your comfort. Practice this question daily across decisions both small and large. Choosing what to eat, how to spend an hour, whether to interrupt your wound narrative, whom to invest emotional energy in every choice, is an opportunity to orient toward or away from the Übermensch. Do not mistake this for narcissistic fantasy. This is not about being better than others, but about exceeding your own current limits. It is not about superiority, but about becoming. The comparison is not with others, but with your own previous self. Are you more capable of self-overcoming today than yesterday? Is your capacity for creating meaning growing or stagnating? The Übermensch is also not cruel. Strength includes the capacity for genuine compassion, not pity, which is the false compassion of the weak, but the compassion of the strong who help others overcome without descending into mutual victimhood. It is weakness that makes cruelty necessary as defense against one's own powerlessness. You now have clear direction for your becoming, not vague aspirations of getting better, but concrete orientation towards self-overcoming as your fundamental nature. Every choice can be evaluated against this standard. This clarity is ruthless but liberating. You know what you are becoming. Each choice either moves you toward it or away from it. There is no confusion, only constant choosing. The Übermensch is the human who has fully embraced the terrible joy of becoming, who has made self-overcoming their reason for existence, who creates meaning through their very being rather than seeking it in therapeutic narratives or religious frameworks or social validation. This is possible. This is your direction. This is what you are becoming with every choice to transcend rather than to explain. Your transformation is not merely personal, it is cultural intervention. This is what you must understand. Each person who refuses therapeutic victimhood alters the moral atmosphere of their community. Your existence becomes argument without words. In a small Swiss village where I spent one winter, a single physician abandoned therapeutic approaches. Instead of sympathetic understanding, he offered patients direct challenge. You can endure this, he told them, rather than let us explore why this troubles you. He did not process their complaints, he challenged them to overcome their complaints. Within a year, the village's character shifted subtly. Less complaining about minor ailments, more resilience in the face of difficulty, a different moral tone in conversations. One, person's refusal to participate in therapeutic culture had disproportionate effect because it demonstrated that an alternative existed. Others, seeing this demonstration, could then choose it for themselves. This is the power of embodied transformation. You change culture not through preaching, but through being. Your becoming creates evidence that therapeutic healing through understanding is optional, not inevitable. This evidence threatens those invested in therapeutic culture's necessity, not through what you say, but through what you are. Every conversation where you refuse to explain, through wounds, slightly alters the moral atmosphere. At first, this is barely noticeable, but these small shifts compound. A community with even a few self-overcoming individuals develops a different character than one where everyone mutually validates weakness. Different conversations become possible. Different choices become thinkable. Different standards of strength become acceptable. Weakness spreads through commiseration and mutual validation. But strength also spreads through inspiration and demonstration rather than through sympathy. Your becoming creates permission for others' becoming, not through missionary work, that would be merely another form of herd behavior, but through clear embodiment that makes the alternative visible to those who have eyes to see it. You bear responsibility now. Once you have seen this path, you cannot pretend you haven't. You must embody the alternative clearly enough that those capable of seeing it have evidence it exists. Your life becomes teaching without words, argument through example, permission through demonstration. In every interaction, be unmistakably yourself, transformed, strong, unburdened by therapeutic narratives. Do not hide your transformation to make others comfortable. Comfort is not kindness when it enables continued weakness. But also do not preach transformation. Do not become a missionary for self-overcoming. Simply be it. Let your being do the teaching. When others notice something different about you, and they will notice, do not explain your methods. Do not offer unsolicited advice. Do not try to convert them to your path. Let them discover their own path. Your responsibility is to be the evidence that transformation without healing is possible, not to ensure others follow your specific method. Most cannot and will not take this path. This is neither tragedy nor failure. It is simple fact. The path of self-overcoming is not for everyone. Some are too invested in their wounds. Some lack the will. Some prefer the comfort of therapeutic culture. This is their choice. Your responsibility is not to save them, but to embody the alternative clearly. Do not measure your success by how many people you convert. That is the measure of a preacher, not of someone who has genuinely transformed. Measure success by whether you are living transformed in community, whether you are clearly embodying strength, whether those who have capacity to see have evidence that another way exists. Your refusal to remain weak slightly shifts the moral atmosphere toward strength. Not dramatically, not immediately, but persistently. This is how culture changes, not through revolutions, but through individuals who simply refuse to participate in the prevailing sickness, who embody health clearly enough that others can see it is possible. You are not just transforming yourself, you are demonstrating transformation's possibility. This adds weight to every choice. You are not choosing only for yourself, but for all those who will observe you and decide whether this path is possible or impossible, whether strength without healing is real or fantasy, whether they too might attempt becoming rather than remain in comfortable explanation. The ultimate test of a life well lived. If you had to live it again, exactly as you lived it, infinite times eternally, every suffering, every failure, every moment of agony and ecstasy, could you say yes? This is the eternal recurrence, and it is the most rigorous standard for existence ever conceived. This is not a metaphysical claim about time structure. I am not making cosmological assertions. I am presenting an existential test. Is your life worthy of affirmation so complete that you would choose every instant again eternally? If you would change anything, given the chance, that element of your life fails its own standard. But if you can, will every moment's eternal recurrence, if your life is so well lived that you would choose every instant again, you have achieved the highest human possibility. On my deathbed in Weimar, had I retained consciousness, I could have said yes to eternal recurrence. Not because my life was easy, it was brutal. Chronic illness from youth, poverty that prevented comfortable existence, misunderstanding that denied recognition during my lifetime, solitude so profound that weeks passed without meaningful conversation, eventual madness that stole my final decade. Yet I could affirm all of it because what I became made every difficulty worth it. The illness that forced solitude created my philosophy. The poverty that prevented social climbing created independence of thought. The misunderstanding that prevented fame created freedom from public opinion's tyranny. I would not change a single element because it produced the work that justifies my existence. This is Amor Fati's ultimate expression, affirmation so complete you choose eternal repetition. Not reluctant acceptance, but fierce, joyful choosing. This transforms how you live. Every choice must be made as if you're choosing it for eternal repetition. This ruthless standard eliminates all weakness disguised as acceptable compromise. Before major choices, ask, could I will this moment's eternal repetition? If you hesitate, don't choose it, or recognize that hesitation reveals the choice's unworthiness. This question cuts through all rationalization. You cannot lie to yourself about whether a choice is worthy of eternal affirmation. The eternal recurrence also works retrospectively. Imagine your deathbed now. Looking back, could you will your entire life's eternal return? If not, what must change immediately? This backwards-looking perspective clarifies present priorities. What seemed important reveals itself as trivial. What seemed trivial reveals itself as essential. Every moment carries infinite weight because you're choosing it for eternal repetition. This transforms trivial choices into significant ones. How you spend an idle hour, what you say in casual conversation, what you tolerate in yourself. Nothing is too small to matter when repeated eternally. The man who would kill an hour would kill eternity, because that hour will return infinitely. Each evening this month, review your day as if it will repeat eternally, exactly as lived. Which moments could you affirm? Which would you prefer to change? Don't. Actually change the past. Use this information to choose differently tomorrow. After 30 days, review. Are more moments becoming affirmable? This tracks your transformation toward a life worthy of eternal repetition. Do not use eternal recurrence to paralyze yourself with perfectionism. You will make choices you later regret. This is human. The question is not whether every moment is perfect, but whether your overall arc is toward creating a life worthy of affirmation. Often the difficult choice is the one you could will eternally because it serves your becoming, even when the easier choice seems more pleasant in the moment. This doctrine is not hedonism disguised as philosophy. Choosing pleasure over difficulty does not necessarily create a life worthy of eternal recurrence. Often the opposite. The life of constant ease becomes unbearable in its meaninglessness when faced with eternal repetition. While the life of chosen, difficulty that serves becoming becomes infinitely affirmable, because each hardship was necessary for the transformation achieved. Your past cannot be changed, but whether it was worth it depends entirely on what you make of it now and in all future moments. Every present moment either validates or invalidates all past suffering. This is the awesome responsibility. You are constantly determining whether your entire past was meaningful or meaningless through how you live now. Now you live with ultimate seriousness because every choice carries infinite weight. You cannot make careless choices when choosing for eternal repetition. This transforms your entire existence from casual living to conscious creation. You are no longer merely living, but crafting a life worthy of saying yes to eternally. This is where the teaching ends and your life begins. The question that remains is not theoretical, but existential. Will you live so well that you could will your life's eternal recurrence? Your answer will be written not in words, but in the life you create from this moment forward. That answer is everything.